Welcome back. Rick Smith now brings in our first guest, Joe Walsh, a former Republican congressman who says he no longer recognizes his old party. Here's Rick.
All of us remember where we were, what we were doing. So what were you doing on that day?
And you know what's interesting, Rick? I get accused all the time on social media by people who say I'm obsessed with January 6th. And I am obsessed with it. And I know you probably are as well, because it had never happened before. And I think, like, when you shut up for a minute and sit back and think about what it was, right? Like, a bunch of Americans violently tried to overthrow an election. When you think that happened here, and that it happened all because, for the first time in American history, a sitting American president, it's just easily, Rick, once a month, I think that. Like, oh my God, think about what happened that day. I sat and watched it on TV and cried. And I cried for a couple hours because I worked in that building, as you know. And it just hit me. I cried for 2 hours, then I got pissed. And then I went on the radio that night and I got really pissed, as you probably did.
No, I was beyond angry. Because look, you know, the one thing that you could say about this country is the exceptional part of this is for the first time in the history of humanity, you had an ideological transfer of power without blood loss. You go back to, John Adams leaving, the first time in the history of humanity that of recorded history of there being an ideological transfer of power without blood being shed. And on that day, that history was broken.
It's I'll give the credit to Amy McGrath in Kentucky, who ran against Mitch McConnell, Democrat Amy McGrath. She said this a few days ago. She said January 6th is the most shameful day in our country's history. I love the way she put that. We've had tragic days, right? Pearl Harbor, September 11th. But January 6th was the most shameful day in our history because, Rick, on those other tragic days, people attacked us. Other countries, other people attacked us. We attacked ourselves on January 6th.
Yeah.
That's shameful. Shameful.
And not just that, and the part that, and you hit this a moment ago, that we had a petulant child that was elected president who couldn't accept the fact that he lost, and every other time that's happened, someone with grace conceded and said, we'll take it next time. This is the remarkable part in all this, because this isn't who I grew up believing we were as a country.
I've said repeatedly for 5 years now, Trump is unfit to be president. A lot of people have said that. And there are a lot of reasons for that. He's a traitor. He's a criminal. He's a pathological liar. He's a psychopath. But Rick, he's unfit because this is, I'm sure there are other people in history like this. Trump is incapable of caring about anything but himself. He's incapable. So January 6th, he loses an election. I'm almost defending Trump because he's humanly incapable of putting the nation's interest before his own. He just can't do it. Again, it's almost not his fault because that's how he's made up. But that's what led to it. He lost an election and he couldn't do what was best for the country. And you know what, Rick, that always pisses me off, and I know you know this, how we rewrite history, and I was on the radio in 2020. Trump began lying about that election months before the election.
Not just months.
People forget this.
Right.
He set the table for months before the election.
I see. I would argue not just months. This was the narrative in 2015. if you remember.
Fair.
Look, if I lose, they stole it. That was
Fair.
always the narrative, because you're right. It's all about him. It's always been all about him. And are we surprised? What is surprising, and again, we've always known Trump is a narcissist, all those things. We've always known that. We've always known that he was never going to concede. He's always, a child, all that. What's surprising to me is the entire Republican establishment that went along with it. The entire Republican electorate that hasn't rejected him. That's the part that I'm mind blown by.
So that's the story, Rick. That's the story, because again, here we are 3 years removed from an attempted coup, all at the hands of one man. And yet that man is going to be the Republican Party nominee for president in 2024. And you and I have talked. Right now, I think he's got a better than 50-50 shot at getting reelected. But we'll get there. Forget about the general election for a moment. This guy is an insurrectionist. He didn't have the balls to accept an election result loss. He's everything every Republican mother and father do not want their kids to be, and yet he remains the leader of the party. Forget about McCarthy, McConnell, all of my former colleagues in Congress. They don't lead. The reason that they stuck with him and are sticking with him now is because, and America's got to wrap their, I keep wanting to swear, America needs to wrap their freaking arms around the fact that, as you said, it's the entire party. The base of the party is his. And Rick, the base of my former party does not believe Jan 6 was a bad day. They just don't.
No,
they tell me that every day.
No, this is the rewrite. I mean, this is, it was a patriotic day. In fact, I had someone the other day tell me it was just like any other day. And I go, I don't know what you do in your house, but in my house, we don't take a dump on the floor and wipe it on the walls. I don't know how that's like any other day, but yet that's what we did. That's what we saw happen in our nation's capital. And again, I go back to, who thinks that? Who does that? What kind of a person does? What kind of people do that? Because it happened multiple times throughout the Capitol. Who does that?
You've heard me say this before, Rick. The base of my former party is radicalized. And a big part of that is they no longer accept basic truths.
Now, here's the thing, Joe. I mean, this is the thing that gets me. Now, quite frankly, you and I, back in 2010s, probably would have been, at each other,
throwing hands.
Probably. You were the radical, in my view, of the Republican Party back then. This is so much worse than 2010. How did that happen?
So you're right. You and I would have fought 10 years ago. I was a radical. I was like the face of the Tea Party, but I was a radical on policy. You and I would have fought like cats and dogs on policy. Today in Congress, I'm no longer a Republican because what happened? Well, because when Trump came on the scene, Rick, policy stopped. I believe in free markets and limited government, and I believe in open legal immigration. Policy stopped, and the party became a cult. It no longer matters where you are as a Republican on policy. It's where you are with him. And then when you extend that, Rick, the rule of law doesn't matter anymore. An election results don't matter. So this is like a million miles beyond policy. I left the party because I couldn't, even though I probably agree with Trump on 60-70% of policy, I couldn't support a party that proudly had a criminal and, in my view, a traitor as its leader. I couldn't, I believed in a border wall. Trump said, screw the Constitution, screw Congress, I'm going to get my own border wall. It was all a lie, but you can't do that because he's not a king. And Rick, most of my Republican supporters have told me the last 5 or 6 years, they don't mind if Trump acts like a king, as long as they get the stuff they want. I couldn't go there.
Yeah, the ends justify the means.
Yes. I couldn't go there. I love our democracy too much. I believe in the rule of law too much. Donald Trump committed crimes to try to overturn that election. That's what Jack Smith believes. That's what I believe. Most Republican voters don't care.
So let me ask you this, because, I say this all the time. Before Donald Trump, I had a number of friends like you, people that we would argue over policy over constantly. We would spar constantly, and at the end of it, we would slap each other on the back, have a good laugh, and walk away. I got you, you got me, whatever. Nobody win, nobody lose. But it was a good exercise in understanding issues and understanding your part of the arguments, and it was good, good guy kind of arguing kind of stuff. Those folks have gone away. It's now, and I liken it to boxing. If you were ever a boxer, when I was boxing, it was, you get in a spar, the science of boxing. You're trying to score points. You're not trying to beat the tar out of each other, but you're just trying to, just work on jabs, this and that. Now it's like, now you got to beat the tar out of each other. And how do we get back to where we're talking about policy? And it isn't, I've got to kill you over if you don't agree with me.
And see, I think, Rick, like it's important to understand that Trump's not the cause of this. Trump's like the result of how broken we are and how divided we are. Trump's not the cause of this. He's the ugly, 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 ugly result. Look, brother, of the people, by the people, for the people, our government is us. This thing called the democracy, to keep this thing going, there's certain things we got to do, the people need to do. And I'd argue we're no longer doing what we need to do. And foremost, Rick, is what you just alluded to. If there's no tolerance among people in a democracy, the democracy doesn't hold. If you want to kill your political opponent or destroy him, a democracy can't hold. I'd argue if you view your political opponent as your enemy, a democracy can't hold. We've got a responsibility to disagree respectfully. And we don't do that anymore. We don't. That's not the fault of politicians. That's not. And by the way, Rick, this isn't just MAGA. This isn't just my crazy right. I go on MSNBC and the left all the time. They do the same damn thing. They do not listen to people who disagree with them. They despise people who disagree with them. Democracy's done if we don't do something about this.
Do you see any way forward? Is holding Trump, let me ask you this way, is holding Trump off the ballot, which I'm against, let me start there. Are you in favor of holding Trump off the ballot?
And don't get mad at me. I'm not going to give you a politician's answer. I would rather kick his butt at the ballot box. But, Rick, what Colorado did, what Maine did, is every bit as much a part of our democratic process as going to vote every 2 years. We're a nation of laws as well, right? Colorado has the authority to determine who qualifies for their ballot. So my stance is let this whole process sort itself out. Colorado did what they did. They have a right to do that in our country. Trump has a right to appeal. The Supreme Court will have a right to rule as they do. I support the process. I'd rather kick his butt at the ballot box. But look, if the Supreme Court rules that he can't be on the ballot, we accept that. Right?
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. I'm with the first part. I think I think he has to be beaten at the ballot box. I fear the martyr thing. I fear the violence that could come out of him being held off. Let me ask you that. But Rick, you don't use that as an excuse not to follow the law. Like I've had people tell me, "Oh, don't convict Trump because then he's going to become a martyr." Like if Jack Smith can. Well, because then what you're saying is Trump's above the law.